We didn't quite plan it that way, but it's a good place to start for the next session. A line can change the world. And the man who's coming up next, he wrote a line that certainly did change this country. We have many national diseases, but the one that I think we'll all agree on is the most chronic, is the disease of corruption. It runs through our veins from the brain center to the toe, from the high to the low. Over the last 3-4 years, there have been 2 seminal events that have completely changed the discourse on corruption. It's the Jan Lokpal movement, and it is the CAG's head, Vinod Rai, and the 3 reports that he brought out. I think we would all agree that whatever the fallouts of those, both the movement and Mr. Rai's reports have been, that it was a welcome intervention, because finally our national disease is up for discussion. But of course, it's also had a kind of complex residue. And today, the man himself is here to both discuss his action, the impact, and the residue of the 3-4 years that he was the head of the CAG in India. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vinod Rai. You don't like being called a hero, but you are that for many people. But now that you've demitted office and you've had some time to reflect on this eye of the storm that you were in for the last 3-4 years, in your own sense, what is it that you achieved? And what are some of the things that you may have done differently?
Well, thank you for having me here, Shoma, because it's not very often that people like to listen to orators, least of all see them first thing in the morning on a stage, you know. But of course, I guess at the most challenging part of my life just now. 24/7 being an employee of the wife is not the easiest thing that one does. It gives you a lot of time to reflect. Well, I guess what we did, and we did it all together in the sense that we got so much of constructive support from media. What we did, I guess, given the opportunity, I wouldn't want to change it in any bit. And I think it was coming to us. Some of us needed to do it. And I guess we have the support of everybody in what has been done.
So, Vinod, of course, like I said, you know, that one line about the 1.76 lakh crore loss, the presumptive loss, is something that absolutely shocked everybody. The maths on that, the jury is still out, but certainly it foregrounded the absolutely pervasive and endemic nature of corruption in India. But like I said, you know, and there's no denying that was welcome, it was needed, and we needed that kind of white heat focus on it. But there has been a lot of arguments around that. And for me, the most interesting thing that arose out of that was that the distinction between mismanagement of a policy and actual incidents of corruption got blurred. Would you accept that? Were there 2 halves to that whole 2G scam? A policy mismanagement, a mistake, and actual corruption?
Well, when you look at it from our point of view, an auditor's point of view, auditor doesn't get into the realm of policy formulation. All that we do is we look at the implementation of the policy, how faithfully has the announced policy of the government been implemented. And we looked at it from that point of view. There was a policy which was created in 2003 through a cabinet decision. That policy was implemented by the Department of Telecommunications. But what we found more than anything else was that the rules and procedures were changed, the goalposts were shifted, and possibly, in a large number of ways, the announced policy was not the policy which was actually implemented. And hence, we came up with our findings.
But, Vinod, just to push this point a little bit further, like I said, there was definitely a kind of malpractice that happened, you know, not following even the rules and regulations of the announced policy. Dates were preponed, people were privileged, you know, all of that happened, which is the old world idea of corruption. You know, you're kind of favoring somebody, or you. But what really caught the nation's fancy and imagination was this idea of a policy, a disagreement over policy being cast as corruption. Now, is that something that you think is a complex zone? Because when you elect governments, you do give them the right and decision, even if it is the wrong decision, it must be their decision. You just said that the CAG is never meant to enter into policy. Do you think that both the media and the CAG strayed into policy and called it corruption?
I'd like to disagree with you on that, Shoma. When did we get into policy? Let me take you through a couple of minutes on this. 2008, the declared policy of government was a first come, first served in distributing spectrum licenses or letters of intent. Fine by us. We never questioned that. We only checked up whether first come, first served has been followed or not. That's number one. We didn't prescribe, we didn't recommend, and least of all have we ever argued it. 2010, government on its own decided to change its policy and get into an auction. Now, the auction in 2010 was completed on 31st of May 2010. Our report came out only on 16th of November. So we were nowhere near prescribing any policy to government. All that we did was, we said, okay, have you implemented the announced policy of 2008? And then you have changed your policy in 2010. It's a part of the auditor's guideline or parameters by which we audit to see the suboptimality of policy. So we compared 2008 and we compared 2010, and we came up with 4 models of the loss figures, as you just mentioned.
Vinod, how much of this, when you look at it from the government's point of view, all democracies are kind of creative dialogue between different institutions. How much of the current mess, what everybody's calling paralysis, where people in influential positions are almost afraid of taking decisions, of putting their name to any paper because of fear of misinterpretation, how much of this is a chronic structural problem? And how much do you think is just an absolute failure of articulation on the part of this government?
We've all grown up in service, getting worried about audit. I've faced audit in the state, where I was in Kerala, in the center, any amount of trepidation that we used to have going before the Public Accounts Committee, in the Ministry of Defense, in the Ministry of Finance, in the Ministry of Commerce. I faced it. We've all grown up. Now, of course, we always thought Big Brother was looking over you, the CBI. We've all grown up with that. So I think anybody who says today that he's scared of taking decisions is just seeking an alibi for non-performance. It's just a kind of a bogey, because if you are really transparently recording all that you feel and the way you have analyzed a particular issue, there's no way anybody can fault you. And in government, you take decisions all the time. Decisions can go wrong. There's no two ways about that, and it can happen anyway. But there is a decision which has gone wrong but taken in good faith. It's an act of omission. Fair enough. Nobody penalizes you for that. But there is another decision which is premeditated, which is for a consideration. That's an act of commission. And I think there's no way in which the latter one should go unpunished.
Both as journalists and as citizens, I think having had this kind of volcanic sort of phenomenon over the last 5 years, this focus on corruption, I think the time has come to move towards what are the kind of mechanisms and structures through which one can begin to fix some of this. And I'm really glad that you spoke about this kind of written decisions. When you're talking about the tools, yesterday we had a session with Nandan and Yogendra and oh my God, Jay Panda, and they were talking about governance being at the absolute core of what's going wrong. So can you spell out some of the tools by which we can begin to fix this governance thing? My own sense, if I may say so, one is the speaking order of giving a rationale, a written rationale for why you've chosen A rather than B or C. Is that a crucial tool? Is that something that governments can do as a rule?
I think the two edifices on which governance and governance in government. See, governance applies anywhere. It can apply to a corporate, it can apply to a non-governmental organization, it can apply to government. The only difference is in government, you are spending money on behalf of somebody else. You've taken money as taxes or anything else which has been kind of collected compulsorily, and you are spending on behalf of somebody else. So your level of accountability should be higher. So I think in government, the two key edifices would have to be transparency, as you very rightly said, a speaking decision, a speaking order. And number two, the transparent fashion in which it has been done. And once you lay that out, I think that's been the most classic achievement of the government today, the right to information, where everybody, all of us today in government sit in glass houses. Each of our actions is being seen outside. And to the extent that it is being seen outside, you have nothing to worry about as long as you are taking a decision which is very fair.
So, because you look at this so closely, Vinod, in your analysis, where would you locate the core of why we've become such a corrupt society? Whether it's the nexus between government and corporates or us as citizens, the absence of work ethic, what is the canker of this? What is the core of it?
I don't think we can really drive to one particular core. I think society, government, industry, all of to blame equally. And I think as a society, we took everything for granted, and we just left good governance to government alone. And a time has come when I think, at least people of my generation feel very happy that today, youth of today rather, is seeking greater participation in government. And I think that's the best thing that can happen. Participative governance is a government which will have to be sensitive to the people, to the environment, and to the extent that governments are required to fulfill the requirements of the people, the citizen at large. The citizen coming center stage has been the best thing that can happen. So governments will be on notice. The public will have to play its role of being a vigilant to that extent. Structures need to be put in place, and which I'm very happy about that they are really being put in place now. Structures which will stand the scrutiny of the public, or maybe a legal scrutiny too.
When you say structures are being put in place, what are some of the structures that are?
For example, today, one of the, I just mentioned about the right to information. Structures being put in place is how a citizen can approach government to make sure that he is able to see X or Y or Z decision-making process. And, of course, very rightly so, X or A or B, C elements of that being kept out. You know, there are issues of maybe sensitive issues of defense, sensitive issues of foreign policy, etc., which need not be brought into public domain, which if brought into public domain convey a very different kind of a position. So I think these are the procedures and structures which have been put in place, and hopefully in a year or 2 years' time, the citizen would get the assurance or the confidence that yes, here is a government which will deliver to our needs, and we will be able to hold them accountable for any decision that they take.
Vinod, before I move away to one of the other crucial issues facing us, which is the use of natural resources and how to go about it, I just want to come back to this idea of presumptive loss. It's a very complex idea, and certainly in the media, I think not all of us are equipped to discuss that with authority, but we have. And I wanted to ask you, how do you compute something like that? Because if you really look at it, say for instance, land that's given to corporates, there's a huge presumptive loss in that. Or say rivers that have been used up for XYZ, where I may not agree with the profit that's been made of it, that's a huge presumptive loss. Is that too fluid a term for an auditor to use? And you know, there are people in politics who call you the R virus and how you've destroyed the economy of this country. So was that too fluid a term? Is that going to haunt us in certain ways?
Auditors worldwide use this expression, presumptive. It's not really presumptuous. It's presumptuous with a certain degree of certainty. That's what the dictionary meaning also says. But globally, the International Monetary Fund uses this. It's a part of the guidelines of auditors worldwide. But homegrown, the direct tax code enunciated by the Government of India as a legislation in Parliament uses the expression presumptive income, presumptive profit. Obviously, they won't talk about presumptive loss because, I mean, you don't tax losses. So it is not an expression which is a figment of our imagination. It's something which is accepted worldwide and well defined too. But why we used it? Because again, auditors worldwide use it, and I'll give you a very different kind of an example. When the 3G was auctioned in the UK, they had benchmarked, they thought they would be getting a figure which would be, say, revenue which would be X. What they got was X plus 2. The government got worried, and the auditor got into the job trying to find out why they had got much more than what they thought they would be getting. They audited it, and that was a presumptive gain in the process, and that's what they've called it. So a presumptive is not something which we created overnight. It was a rabbit or ace pulled out of our sleeves, a rabbit out of our hat. It's an expression used by auditors globally, and it signifies a certain, but as far as national resources are concerned, we benchmark it. And we've explained 4 models, this figure of 1.76, well, if it was audited in it was auctioned 2010, how much did you get? If it had to be auctioned in 2008, what would you have got? Just a comparison between 2 issues which were already in public domain.
And the fact that when they did go in for the auction and it raised much less, how would you kind of square with that?
Oh, see, the market conditions are dynamic. Market is not, I mean, look at the market as it was in 2008. Look at the market as it was in 2010. You auction it today and you'll just see very different figures. The government is proposing to auction it. Markets are dynamic. The prices that you obtain, I mean, look at property prices today as it was, say, 3 years back. So obviously, the market does not stay at the same level. It will be different, and hence we have shown that it will be different.
I'm just going to come back a little later to this idea of corruption and how it's become a very fluid term, and I think needs more complex understanding now. But I just wanted to move to this use of resources, of natural resources, Vinod, because I think the Ashok Chawla committee was set up with 15 chief secretaries from different ministries. Yeah. They did suggest auctions, but Mr. Chawla was also saying that it's not necessary that auctions will be the only transparent or only the correct way to go, because 2 things. One, there will only be the rich players. How do new people get into a game? Because you'll only have the big boys who will always be able to quote the highest prices. And also, you can change the terms of dealing even after something has been auctioned. So this really is one of the most burning issues for a country.
Absolutely.
What is your own sense of it?
I quite agree with what you say and what the Ashok Chawla committee has said. Believe me, at no point of time have we suggested auction. All that we've said is that it should be a market discovery process, which is seen by all. How have you arrived at, and this figure of 1658, which was a figure which was discovered in 2001, but applied in 2008 for the auction. That figure of 1658 was discovered how? It was by a beauty parade process, which is a market discovery process. And we didn't say auction. It was the Ministry of Finance which kept telling the Department of Telecommunications that please auction, Now, see, even the Planning Commission document, 11th Plan document says, national resources, obviously they have certain social obligations, social benefits. Exactly. So you have to have a balance between social benefits and revenue generation. We've never said revenue maximization. We've said revenue generation. So you balance between the two, because obviously you can't give it away for free. And you are giving it to somebody, a private entrepreneur, who is going to exploit it for commercial benefit. So obviously you have to give it to him at a price. And the price is the balance that you have to derive between the social benefit and the commercial benefit that he's going to derive out of it.
So you're saying it should be a fluid process. I mean, it's circumstance by circumstance. To come back again to this core idea of't today that we face, I think the old ideas of corruption was that a suitcase of money changes hands. Today it's just a signature. Can you explain to us the nature of this kind of magnum scale corruption, and why, Raghuram Rajan said that democracy itself is under assault by the kind of crony capitalism that has crept into this country. So, what is the key reason why we've moved away from sort of a free market to just pure crony capitalism? Structurally, what is it that can be fixed?
See, one of the reasons why we moved away was the opacity of decision making in government. When government feels, or anybody in power feels, that I'm being elected or I've been nominated for a period of 5 years, touch me not within those 5 years, and I have been selected, elected, whatever it is, to rule or to govern. That, as what was believed earlier, that I'm doing a service to the nation. I've been selected to serve the nation. The moment you get into that, that sense of entitlement, that sense of empowerment comes into you. And if your decision-making process is going to be opaque, then you decide that, okay, I'm in place. Why? Because I owe it to X or Y or Z. Within this 5-year period, I have to bring about a certain benefit to X or Y or Z. And that's how we get into cronyism. And I guess once you get into cronyism, then post granting of contracts, concessions that you give, you rig contracts, those kind of things start happening. And that's how procedures start disintegrating.
2 questions before the bell starts ringing is that, because again, to my mind, the vacuum of articulation that this government has created, there's a lot of overlapping of institutions right now. You did mention that at no point have you recommended that auction should be the route, but certainly the Supreme Court did enter into that zone. There's been a lot of judicial activism. Do you think that this is a worrying trend?
Well, not really. It's not even the Supreme Court that has recommended. It was the Ministry of Finance which has recommended auction. But
they did on the specific 2G case, but the Supreme Court went one step further and said all natural resources must always be auctioned.
Yeah, I mean, it should be competitive bidding because, you know, there is competition introduces a certain element of efficiency. And when you're dealing with national resources, there needs to be efficiency because how do you protect the interest of the nation at last? You know, whether it's the judiciary, the legislature, or the executive, basically it's a zero-sum game. If somebody cedes space, somebody else moves into that space. And obviously, if the executive is not taking a certain decision, the judiciary will help the nation in taking certain decisions. But more importantly, let's forget 1.76, let's forget anything else. I want to ask everybody a simple question. How many of us can look into the eyes of our progeny and say, yes, I saw it all happen. It was unfortunate, it was happening before my eyes, but I did not have the courage to stand up and say it was happening. You know? So basically, whether it's the Supreme Court or an auditor or the vigilance element, whatever it is, somebody somewhere has to bring it up into public domain so that public consciousness puts pressure on the decision makers that, look, you are under observation. You know?
Vinod, apart from the kind of tectonic phenomenon that you yourself were, there was the Lokpal movement and the desire for a certain kind of Lokpal that Arvind Kejriwal and others were asking. Do you think that that was a wise kind of construct? Because the question I'm really asking is that even when there are good men like you in institutions, the actual process of investigation is in someone else's hands. And whether it's on the coal case or the 2G, there is a sense that there has been very selective investigation and selective punishing. How is one going to fix that mechanism?
Yeah, thank you for calling it tectonic and not Tehelka or something. I was getting worried sitting here, you know, that you will say that you created Tehelka. See, Lokpal as a concept is an excellent concept, undeniable. And I think we need to have a Lokpal be put into position because it's a need of the hour. Now, we'll all have differences of opinion how it should be created, how it should be structured. Should it be a statutory body? Should it be a constitutional body? Should it be a police body? There are lots of opinions about that, and I guess each one of us would have. How it happened, what it happened, well, now that I'm a private citizen, I have my own private views about it. I didn't want to air it right here.
Okay. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I would have loved to plumb him for more ideas. We were going to have 2 other people on this panel, J.M. Lingdo and Gopal Subramaniam, who both in their different ways have been trying to fix different parts of this system. They couldn't be here, but you know, it's excellent to have Mr. Vinod Rai here. He breathed life into an institution. And for me, that's the greatest thing, because I think what we realize is that one good man or one good woman can change everything, and we don't need to despair the way we do. Thank you,
Thank you
Mr. Rai.
Thank you for having me.